You have to trust me.
Coming off the back of reviewing Silent Hill: The Short Message, a game I believe would have been better served as a short film, or at least could have done a better job of blending its story with a game, I thought I would play Quantum Break, a game that is controversial for blurring the lines between the medias back in 2016. 6 years after the well-received Alan Wake, Remedy again played to their strengths and went with another narrative-driven game which also, like with Alan Wake, puts a unique twist on third-person combat. Quantum Break is heavy on the story. The ratio spent watching cutscenes and playing the game can feel about even at times. It's clear that Remedy doubled down and ramped up the production values for the story element. I feel this was a risky move, upping the time gamers are watching cutscenes, as the audience is there primarily to play a game, not watch a show. See, I remember watching this trailer for the first time and thinking, how much of the resources which could have been put into the gameplay have been sacrificed to fund the cutscenes, storyline, and the actors needed to make the show happen?
My name is Paul Serene. I've seen the end.
Honestly, I was unconvinced that allocating resources in this way was the best idea, as Alan Wake was never fundamentally a tight shooter. It has a good reputation for its story and unique enemies rather than doing anything above standard with the combat controls. From my memory, it was actually inferior to other third-person shooters. With this in mind, when Quantum Break released, I weighed up if I should get it, as there were very few exclusives for the Xbox in 2016, and still to this day if we're honest. In the end, I concluded that I didn't like the idea of buying a game where a lot of the resources have gone into the cutscenes.
Not why I'm here, Chief. Holster that safety whistle.
Prick.
My thinking was, I'd much rather most of the budget for a game go into the gameplay, and for me, a studio advertising they have pulled back resources on their weakest component didn't seem like a smart place to put my money. For me, having a great story and cutscenes are an added bonus rather than the driving factor for buying a game. That being said, Quantum Break seemed like the perfect game for me 8 years after its release, as I found myself lacking enthusiasm for something taxing with a long time commitment. I also realised that I spent most of my Game Pass month playing Among Us. That kind of shows my lack of interest in the exclusives Xbox has to offer. With 4 days left on the pass and planning to bail back to the PlayStation world, I panicked and scoured the Game Pass to find an exclusive that could be completed within the time limit I had. Quantum Break was the only turkey in the shop, so yeah, it's a short game, taking around about 10 hours, which did feel like the show had taken priority over the gameplay to some capacity. You'll have to make up your own mind if it is worth the trade-off as I go through this review. Overall, I quite enjoyed sipping a beer watching the cutscenes, but afterwards, when it came to playing the game, I felt pretty detached and uninterested, as I had settled myself in to watch a film. With that being said, the outcome of this review is to determine if Quantum Break is worth getting for the gameplay. I will quickly set the stage for the story, because if you don't like how it sounds, the whole experience crumbles, and I would recommend that you give it a pass. This will make more sense as I go through. Anyway, the story. We play as angry-faced Jack, who has gone to a university to see his friend Paul, and possibly his estranged brother. They both work on really complicated physics stuff. When we arrive, we meet Paul, who gives us the layman skinny of what they have been working on. From there, we get roped into turning on a doohickey to quickly realise that maybe people shouldn't be messing around with things that can end all existence. The short of it is, time gets fractured, we become superhero Quicksilver Quantum Man, and find out that our brother was trying to prevent this from happening, and our no longer friend Paul had ulterior motives from the start. We find ourselves stuck in the middle trying to stabilise time before it gets to the point of no repair. I have to admit that the writing and acting gets top marks, even though I felt like Jack was the typecast for a cocky white bad boy American protagonist. That aside, the conspiracy thickens, introducing more characters. The actors all do a good job immersing us into the story arc with their own well-written motives and situations. The first thing I noticed looking through the menu was that the auto-aim was on by default. Now, I'm one of those people who can't stand having auto anything being on in shooters, as I feel it dumbs the gameplay down, making it too easy, thus pointless turning up for, so I turned that off and cracked on. However, it didn't take long before I regretted that decision, because when I started playing, I quickly came to realise that the game had been designed around having auto-aim on. Having it off makes life difficult because the enemy's movements are designed for auto-aim being on, meaning they move too fast to get a lock on to them before the opportunity is missed. Now, the only thing you can do to counteract the enemy movement is to constantly tweak the sensitivity, but I couldn't find a setting that worked for me because, again, the game is designed to have it on, so finding the right response level is not possible. At this point, I'd like to say that Remedy has never been the best at making third-person shooters. It is why I suspect they have designed Quantum Break with auto-aim as the default to basically get around that fact. But what made things more frustrating for me was when I put the auto-aim back on, it wouldn't let me be really lazy like in GTA 5. I couldn't vaguely aim in the direction and let the lock-on do most of the work. It wanted me to be much more precise, which annoyed me because I already felt forced into having the auto-lock on in the first place. In my world, a shooter designed with auto-aim should be easier and more forgiving. That's the point of having it. If you're going to make me near enough aim at a target then lock on, it just throws me off because I have done most of the aiming. In my mind, I am free aiming up until that point where the game does the last inch, and I just can't get my head around it. I do believe for this type of casual shooter to be fun, they should have given a wider lock-on range. Remedy, do you want me to aim or don't you? This is somewhere in between and it really didn't sit well with me. As a result, the shooting is not the sort of thing that wants to fundamentally challenge your skills, but at the same time it also doesn't allow you to have casual fun with it. What I think they were going for was to make the player feel empowered and have fun, so my advice is to go with the direction the game poorly executes. Leave auto-aim on and even whack it on easy. That's dirty, but I have no shame saying that because I want this game to be one way or the other, a challenging, well-controlled third-person shooter or a casual OP shooter, I don't have any qualms of whacking it on easy. The shooting just doesn't work for me because it doesn't know what it wants to be. I also didn't like that the guns don't pack a punch, they feel like BB guns. There's nothing more to add. The takeaway is that the shooting is lackluster. What I think the developers banked on was the abilities and environmental props to vary the combat enough to have some fun. Dispatching enemies by freezing time and hitting explosive tanks gives it more of appeal than just going in mowing people down with the most efficient gun you can find. Building on that, they have made it challenging with decent level design and smart AI. It is well designed in that way because only using guns is usually not a viable option, as even the lackeys understand basic combat techniques such as suppressive fire, flanking and smart covering positions to pin you down. They also like tossing the odd grenade if you hunker down in a hole for too long as well. But it's nothing like the mindless spamming of endless grenades which you'll find in the likes of COD. And that's the bread and butter of the combat. It is engaging with the abilities, CQB, environmental props to plan around and slow-mo thrown in to be flashy. As you progress through the game, specialised enemies come out to ruin your superior time abilities over the lackeys.
I knew that Monarch had technology to let their soldiers move in stutters, but this was bigger than that.
I always give a big thumbs up to any third-person shooter that gives the ability to change which side you're aiming on. It is always a must, because to my knowledge every third-person shooter has you shoot right-handed, and that becomes an issue if you use cover on the right side. I mean use cover without actually using the cover mechanics. See, when you're shooting right-handed on your right side, you can't aim out from the corner, which means you have to walk most of the way out to get a shot on anyone. Why don't you use the cover mechanics then, I hear you say? Well, the big advantage of not using it is that I don't have to pop out like a whack-a-mole when I go to take a shot. Instead, I can inch in and out picking shots off while exposing far less of me than I would using the cover mechanic. This is why someone at some point became wise to this and introduced the ability to move the cursor over to the left. Quantum Break understands this problem and the solution, but nonetheless still manages to miss the beat. You see, switching the view is half the issue. To fully compensate for the third person view, you either have to change the hand you're shooting with, or have the reticle move further over when switching to the left. Otherwise, it's as useful as shooting right-handed using your left eye. Remnant is the perfect example of how to do this right. It is so well done that changing sides doesn't interrupt the action. It's seamless and feels the same shooting on either side. Then we have Quantum Break's attempt. As you can see, you don't get the advantage of sight by switching to the left as you should. It is useless here because when you're moving from the right side cover, even with the reticle on the left side, you still have to pretty much walk all the way out to get a shot on anyone. My response to this was to stick to the left as much as I could and get annoyed when I couldn't. As I'm on the subject of getting annoyed, something else that rubbed my rhubarb was the auto cover mechanic. I don't understand the purpose or need for this. Why can't we crouch in this modern third person shooter? There were so many times I could have used distance cover while crouching to my advantage, but because I couldn't crouch, I had to run through a hail of bullets to the nearest cover, which I was then velcroed to. I felt there was little else I can do with no immediate cover but run and hope. There's also no cover fire either, which is really odd. In the early days of third person shooters, the only way to shoot from cover was to swing all the way out and shoot. Someone again realised this was stupid and asked, why can't we fire blindly around or over cover? Well, not blindly because we can see, but you know what I mean. Remedy doesn't get this, so it limits your options down to running in for the closest cover possible, then you're stuck using the snap-on aim to pop up from cover to systematically take everyone out. In my opinion, they really should have gone with another boring game that did this type of shooter better. Gears of War. Sure, this is less stiff than Gears, but essentially it's the same kind of shooter. I get that this type of combat is dull because Gears has done it to death by this point, but I'd argue it would be less painful than this. Even Gears lets you cover fire. This is the first third-person cover shooter I have played that doesn't have blind firing. On that subject, I can't blind fire, but I can aim perfectly over or around cover. How does that make any sense? To say the least, I didn't like it for those reasons.
Blaine, you got any theories about being able to manipulate time? No. Time, come up with one. Shit! Why are they still shooting?
All they had to do was copy and paste the combat from something practical, because let's be honest, Quantum Break was never intended to revolutionise third-person combat, so why did they bother trying to reinvent the wheel with these poor decisions? Basic combat would have been fine, as the game is more focused on the story and the abilities than it is with the shooting. So the abilities and AI do make it somewhat interesting, but living with the aforementioned oversights soon put me off playing it. I refuse to adapt to a second-rate third-person shooter when Remnant lives in my disc tray and I could throw on Saints Row. Another thing that you can do is cheat in the same way you can in GTA 5. By standing at the right angle around a bit of cover, you'll find the enemy stands still most of the time and you can angle a shot at people from this spot. They usually don't shoot because they think you're behind the cover, and sometimes you can even shoot through walls. I couldn't find the clear direction Remedy was going for with the combat. If they wanted to make it a casual shooter, then dumb down the AI, because for me, the AI was programmed for a game with better player controls. And they should have made the auto-aim with a wider range to compensate for the enemy movement speed. I do question why they went with auto-aim that wasn't well optimised. Either utilise it or don't bother having it. If they did this, I feel that things would have been faster paced and less of a standard cover shooter. If they wanted to make it challenging, again give basic controls. How did this get missed in development? The sensitivity also needed to be much tighter than it is to give the player full control to seamlessly flow through the combat. I feel the lines got twisted somewhere in production and they made odd decisions when the game would have been fine as a nothing special, out of the box, third person shooter, rather than what they come up with. I mentioned that the combat has been Remedy's weak point, but this time they seem to make it more so by relying on automated systems. Being a cynic, I think they adopted these systems because they can't make a competent third-person shooter, and they thought that automating things would be fine for the casual market. I will say that the abilities kind of make up for the shortfall, but it feels to me that I'm strong-armed into using them because basic third-person controls have been taken away. Overall, if the shooting was better, then I could have tied in the combat with the abilities fluidly. Now, time puzzles are not my thing. Portal was a version of hell I do not like to think about, so when I realised time puzzles were thrown in, I thought this is where I'm going to get stuck. However, most of the puzzles are easy, but there are quite a few that were head scratchers. I was surprised to find some resistance in this sort of mainstream game. I thought this was going to be on par with Uncharted. This is harder. As you may have guessed, you have to use your abilities to rewind time on particular objects in order to progress or freeze time to stop something like a random door slamming. Sometimes you have to use a combination of both with the speedrun ability thrown in. The nice thing for some is that they have included an X-ray vision. This shows you where the puzzle is as well as collectibles. More than anything, the puzzles look flashy. It's nothing outside of what you would expect from a game with time manipulation abilities. It breaks up the combat, giving you something else to do. The muddy water makes this hard to say if it's worth playing because the game and the TV show prop each other up. The show does some of the heavy lifting getting you invested, but the gameplay has its issues with taking control away from the player. The abilities, smart AI and variety in enemies give it enough to keep it from being a snorefest, but they missed fundamental necessities like crouching and optimising the switching reticle. That, as well as lackluster guns coupled with irritations like auto cover and designing the game around auto aim, put me off the combat. It really needed to pick a lane. If they wanted to make a game that empowers the player, then they should have gone with an arcade style gameplay, something like Stranglehold. If they wanted a tactical cover shooter, then do Gears of War. Both of them know their lane and that's why they work. Quantum Break couldn't quite get it right in my opinion. So what I'm saying is, don't buy this solely for the gameplay, if you're like me and can't look past the issues I've brought up. On the other hand, as an overall experience with the TV show and the gameplay, it could be worth considering if you don't mind your hand being held. I think the story is great and the gameplay can deliver in places. That being said, I feel that the combat needed more creative abilities, and the lengthy cutscenes do and don't work in this game's favour, which is why it is controversial. Sometimes there are games that work better on easy, and this is one of them. When I whacked it on easy, I had more fun using the time abilities without caring too much about being tactical. I found it was much better than being in cover, popping up and down, just picking people off and using the abilities here and there. I did find that there were times I really wanted to skip the gameplay and just get back to the show, and I think that says a lot about which one delivered more. From a purist gamer perspective, it is a dud. But as a casual experience, it's certainly worth a go if you have Game Pass. For me, this falls into the same hole as Senua's Sacrifice and Silent Hill: The Short Message. I would rather watch all of the cutscenes taped together than play the game.